Welcome to We Are Human Leaders. I'm Sally Clark, and today Alexa Sana and I are speaking with Hema Vyas on heart intelligence in leadership. We discuss in depth the impact of heart intelligence on how we lead, how we communicate, how we evolve, and how we live as humans and as leaders. Hema Vyas is the Omnipreneurial Psychologist and an international speaker and mentor. Hema guides the path to commercial success, evolutionary and inclusive leadership, wellbeing, and positive impact for diverse global audiences. Her work is centered on connecting with ancient wisdom to solve the problems of modern times, especially by understanding the significance of the heart. Hema helps leaders connect to their own personal truth and build towards a life of love, joy, mindfulness, and prosperity. Her vision closely aligns with the core components of human leadership. We hope you'll enjoy this conversation with Hema as much as we did. Let's delve in. Welcome to We Are Human Leaders, Hema. We're so delighted to have you with us today. We'd love to start just by understanding a little bit of your story, your journey that has brought you to the incredible work that you're doing today.
So I think I grew up sort of mixed cultures. I'm Indian originally, but grew up in England. And so therefore, I've always had a very spiritual upbringing. It wasn't obvious because it was just part of my heritage, part of my culture, and part of our belief system. But it was really interesting because when I'd go out into the world and be myself, I was met with people who were quite shocked at some of the ways that I was, super friendly, super open, just would ask questions that people would be quite taken aback by. And I never quite understood it when I was growing up. But I became very popular as a result, because I think that what I realize now is that people were desperate to be seen. Children were desperate to be seen. And of course they weren't, because there was a barrier, a block to, what was, culturally acceptable in terms of what you could ask. And I was quite forthright, quite direct. I didn't think I was. I thought I was just being me. But it was really interesting as I look back over my history, and I think, wow, these are really interesting moments that, where just showing up as yourself is so, so important, and really, really being able to connect with your heart, because from a young age I was very empathic. So I could feel other people's feelings. I could feel when somebody really wanted to share, when they wanted to talk, when they wanted to open up. And so I was that person who was always able to see it, recognize it, and be a vehicle for them to be able to express themselves and to feel really, really seen and not judged. And so that was, when I was a child. I'm talking about, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And because, I was born in Africa, lived in India for the first few years of my life. English wasn't my first language. So coming to England was really interesting from the point of view that when I was able to just, speak, and I was quite shy and I thought I wouldn't be accepted, and yet I became so popular, and I could never understand why this little girl, first Asian girl in this school, was sort of so accepted and so loved. And I now look back and I see it's because I was just showing up and letting them be seen. And that's what the world needs now, and that's a lot of my work, really helping people to be seen.
So beautiful, Hema. I think it sounds like you really struck a chord, a very deep chord, and a sort of very fundamental human psychological need to feel seen and heard. And it's so beautiful in the context of that sort of, school environment. I can imagine where no one can even see that or articulate it. And yet that was exactly what was happening in a probably very raw and also very authentic and natural way as a child. And it also sounds like there's quite an innate curiosity that you brought to it as well. Is that something that you've seen also sort of through your work and as part of your journey, sort of shifting from child, adolescent into the work that you do now in the business environment?
Oh, absolutely. I think from a young age, I was always asking the big questions, like what's beyond the sky? You've got the sky and then what goes beyond that? And I always find that, the quality of questions determine the quality of your life. And so growing up, always being curious, and so having a scientific background, being able to go, okay, why is this happening? Why is this like this? Should it be like this? Asking those bigger sort of questions, being really, really curious, and really finding that there weren't the answers that I was looking for in textbooks, or there certainly wasn't the answers from other people. Like at university, a lot of lecturers and professors and teachers were not very open to the kind of things that I was curious about, especially about the hard energy, because at the time I didn't call it hard energy, but I was like, we're talking in psychology about the brain and all of these things and physiology and, but what about the heart? Why are we not talking about the heart? And so that became like a lifelong journey to really bring the heart intelligence to the world. And I know lots of people are talking about it now, but 30 years ago that wasn't the case.
Hema, I just want to reiterate something I heard you say there, and I feel like I can't move on without saying it again. And that is that you mentioned this concept of, the quality of your questions determines the quality of your life, I think was what you said. And that to me is just, I couldn't move past that without sort of bringing that forward again for people to hear again. It's so impactful. And, sort of shifting now into the work that you're doing with, I know you're bringing the concept of heart intelligence, or the science really of heart intelligence, to organizations and to leaders. And interestingly, the science of the heart is that it is more powerful than the brain. I forget the actual sort of equation there, but I know that the coherence or the frequency of the heart is like 10,000 times more powerful than the brain, or something insane like that. So it's such a powerful part of our being and our physiology. And I'd love to know, Hema, in your experience of doing this heart intelligence work in perhaps a corporate setting or with leaders, what do you really see as the core difference between a leader who's able to lead from the heart, and what does that actually mean? And a little bit more about why that perhaps matters so much for us, in the state of the world right now.
Absolutely. So I would say the old paradigm was, I think there've always been leaders that have led from the heart. They just haven't known it, and they haven't necessarily termed it. But I think now we need more leaders to become conscious of it, because, and it's my opinion, but my opinion is that, as businesses grew and organizations became bigger and bigger, and more departments, more silos, what happened was a lot of leaders began to lose the connection to heart. They started off with a passion, a purpose. Every business begins with that space, and as it gets bigger and bigger, they become less conscious because, of course, the pressures pile on, etc., etc. And I think the importance of the work that I'm doing, that you're doing, that people are doing now, really bringing this awareness about leading from the heart, is to give people an opportunity to recognize that we need to pause, that we need to stop, that we need to become more conscious of what it really means to have work-life balance. And work-life balance isn't about splitting your time 50-50 or 60-40 or anything like that. It's really about checking in with who you are, how you're feeling, whether you're processing things, whether you're processing information, whether you're processing your emotions, whether you're processing what's happening in life, whether you're processing other people. And really, really being heart-led is really allowing people to sort of come back to an awareness of their emotional intelligence. But I would say really heart-led is about coming back to spiritual awareness. For a long time, we don't talk about heart, we don't talk about spirit, we don't talk about, esoteric concepts, and yet we are, holistic beings, and we're living on a planet that is held, in the cosmos through ways that we can't even begin to explain through physics or science. And so surely the same applies for us. So there is a deeper part of us that we need to not ignore if we're going to be effective, not only as leaders, but if we're going to be effective in businesses and making choices that are healthy for us as individuals, that are healthy for the employees and the people who are involved and impacted by the work and the businesses that we run, but also that is going to ultimately be healthy for the planet. So really, heart-centeredness is really about aligning all aspects of our being more conscious of it, and taking steps to connect to it on a daily basis, and connecting to it in a way that we acknowledge that we matter as human beings, and it's not just about the business or the bottom line or productivity. It's about so much more.
I love that, Hema, and I'm really hearing how it's, I think, this historical mind tendency that humans have to really categorize and want to separate and label, and I think what you're speaking to is this really beautiful alignment between different facets of our experience that actually permeate our entire existence, and that's a good thing. That is a wonderful and powerful thing, that spirituality and heart-centeredness can be a part of business. And I think what you spoke to also about it being awareness that we can really imbue our present moment with, that facilitates connection between human beings as businesses, consumers with products, whatever it is, that sort of sense of connectedness that can occur when we're leading with our heart wisdom. I'm really curious to delve in specifically, if we can for a moment, to the impact of heart intelligence in communication. So as leaders, how can we use this awareness and this heart intelligence to drive our communication skills with the people around us?
So, I always say that the heart communicates first and then the words follow. So the heart starts, the mind then turns it into words and makes sense of it, and then, we open our mouths and we speak. So when we really, really understand that, the importance of clearing the debris from our hearts so that we show up really, really ready and present in that moment, we are going to be able to communicate more effectively what is true for us and who we really are. So understanding how the heart energy works, understanding that there is a communication that exists outside of words, that exists even outside of non-verbal communication, because of course psychology has looked at a lot of, verbal and non-verbal communication. But, to really now delve into the heart wisdom, to understand what is the heart communicating, how is the heart communicating. And I think it starts with really being in touch with ourselves, as you said, Sally, earlier, awareness that there is that communication. Why is it somebody walks in the room and you immediately feel better? Why is it somebody walks in the room and you immediately feel jangled? Because there is a communication going on. And if we are aware of that as leaders, then we're able to make more time in our work lives to take time to help people understand the importance of, that non-verbal communication, but also then to help people to get in touch with being more authentic, get in touch with being more transparent, get in touch with being more honest, getting in touch with, having the courage to speak out when you don't necessarily fit in the room. Sometimes you can be the only dissenting voice. So how do we understand, that the heart is communicating that dissent anyway. So when we really know that and we understand that, we're able to say, okay, well then let's just help these people who perhaps want to speak up but haven't been able to speak up, to find the courage to do that. So the training, in these sort of qualities becomes so essential, because that is part of what I think has caused companies to lose a lot of employees, or to not be as productive, not be as creative. That has led to burnout. Because why does that happen? When people feel there's a lack of connection with their values, their needs being met, their spirit, but also their will. So if there is a need to communicate something, and yet people are not able to feel safe, or they're not able to find courage, or they don't feel they can in that space for whatever reason, then it's going to create a toxicity in that environment, and that has such a ripple effect. So it's about the softer skills, the heart quality skills, that I think people think, well, we don't have time for that. We need to concentrate on productivity, or we need to concentrate on, getting the business off the ground. It's like, no, without those foundations of people really, really tuning in to these qualities and knowing that there is a space for those qualities to be kind of cultivated, for these qualities to be really valued and respected and brought to the forefront of the business, I think businesses struggle over time. And of course, there are lots of people who do it organically, naturally, and so that's not to take away from that. But if we do it more mindfully, if we do it more consciously, then I think that it's going to have a much deeper impact, because we can all lose ourselves in the moment. We can all be heart-centered and then lose ourselves. So if everybody's working with that paradigm in mind, then I think it's going to be much, much more effective longer term.
Yeah, absolutely, Hema. And, I agree with this idea. Sally and I see it so much in the work we do. Organizations really measuring bottom line, in the hard metrics that we can see. And I think they struggle to connect the dots between concepts like heart intelligence and how a leader who's really showing up in that way can actually positively impact the bottom line, and the flow on that presence in of itself has on the people around them, and how that impact then affects the meaning they have at work, the purpose they have at work, and then obviously the things that businesses like to measure, like their productivity, their outputs, the KPIs, and all the things that come with it. And one word that sort of kept coming to my mind as you were speaking is this idea of, you mentioned it's not about balance, but to me it feels like it's an integratedness. It's about human beings having the space to show up as their whole selves, their spiritual selves, their emotional selves, their mental, physical, all of those selves at work. And I certainly can speak from my own experience here, having lived a past life in corporate marketing and fairly big companies that were very KPI driven and those sorts of things, that you certainly walk in the door of some of those organizations and leave pieces of you at the door, and then you sort of put your game face on. And, there were so many times where, listening to you speak just then, talking about this idea of sensing people's energy and things like that in the room. But in my experience, I would simply ignore certain things about the way I would feel, because they were unproductive towards the goals that I knew I had to achieve. So you shut pieces of yourself off, or, push feelings down and things like that, because it's not really moving you towards the goal that's been set for you. So that was just something I took out of what you were saying there, that to me, it really sounded like human integration versus work-life balance. It's about allowing space for the whole human to show up. And I want to dive into this concept that you speak to regularly, Hema, and that is the term omnipreneurship. And I'd love to firstly understand what exactly this concept means. And also, would you be able to walk us through sort of what some of the key components of being an omnipreneur are?
Absolutely. So, ultimately, all of my work comes back to heart. So, ultimately being an omnipreneur is really, really about really stepping into our hearts, because, we have our instinct from the gut, and we have our instinct, that the cerebral instinct, the intellect that comes from the brain. But where the balance is for all of ourselves, that alignment comes from the heart space. And so really, really being an omnipreneur, I think, is a term that I felt applied to where we're going in the future. So we have a lot of entrepreneurs, we have a lot of businesses, and really omnipreneurship is about a different kind of person, whether you work in an organization, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you run your own business, whether you run several businesses, whether you're interested in several products, whatever your situation, at the end of the day, I think we all need to step up and become entrepreneurs. And what that means is that we take responsibility for ourselves, and we take responsibility for, clearing our emotional traumas, both individual and collective. It's really about how we can show up in a way where we can really, really shine through with our purpose, why we're here. We're all part of an ecosystem. We belong, and we absolutely don't need to go outside and look for validation for a sense of belonging. When we really, really have that synergy within ourselves, we find that connection within ourselves. We find that sense of belonging that allows us to be responsible for the choices that we make, for the human being that we become, for the people that are impacted by us, whether it's our personal life, professional life, social life, whether it's, how we show up in the world independently, how we show up collectively. But it's also about really, really shining through with that sense of purpose and understanding that sense of interconnectedness, which allows us to take care of the planet that we're living on. So omnipreneurship is really about the people, the human-centeredness, and the connectedness of that human aspect, the connectedness of how we all have our purpose and how we can take responsibility for really, really stepping into our power, and financially as well as, professionally. So it's not just about meeting someone else's bottom line, meeting our own bottom line. What are our needs? How do we get our needs met? And how can we take care of ourselves, take care of other people, and take care of the planet that we're living on?
So impactful there, Hema, and it leads me really beautifully sort of into the next question that I'd love to ask you, and that is this idea of authenticity. We hear a lot about this in the business space right now. What does it mean to be an authentic leader? But I'd love to hear it in your words. What does authenticity mean to you personally, and how does this connect to heart-centered leadership?
Coming back to sort of, the heart energy and the science and my understanding of the science behind the heart, I really believe that the heart acts both as a magnet and a mirror. And what that means is that basically things show up in our lives to help us heal aspects of whatever we're holding on to energetically that doesn't belong here in this space. So it might be, in our DNA, it might be ancestral energies that we're holding on to. It might be traumas from our past, traumas from other people's past, trauma from our society, from our cultural past, because all of these things impact us. And part of being really, really authentic as a leader, I think we have a responsibility as humanity going through what we're going through right now to really heal a lot of those traumas. We cannot be authentic just by being outspoken or just by saying, well, this is who I am and I don't care about, what other people think. That's not what authenticity is about. It's about clearing away stereotypes, patterns, energies, thoughts, feelings that we've held on to that don't belong to this time and space. How can we be truly present to this moment if we're holding on to biases, when we're holding on to stereotypes or cultural beliefs that don't necessarily belong to us in this moment. And so taking the time to really, really heal ourselves, to heal what the heart shows up as, where there's some healing to be done. And we can see where things are going wrong in the world, for example. Well, I think that's a collective responsibility of all of us to really, really go, okay, this isn't just about the politicians or the decisions that are made on our behalf. This is about us taking, sovereignty, being really sovereign in our own rights and really taking responsibility and saying, who are we and how can we clear those things? How can I really, really process what's happened this morning at breakfast before I go into work, so that when I go into work, I'm not carrying a little bit of residual energy of, I might have been irritated with, my son not sort of clearing up. And, when I've asked him 10 times and, okay, well, I have to have the space to clear that. And then, to be conscious of that, to be conscious that these things impact me, then I can go in and be authentic. So that's one level of authenticity. But there's another level of authenticity, which is, we know in psychology that we are so, so deeply impacted by the resonance of other people. We know, for example, social experiments that have been done. You walk into, and I'll give you an example. And I saw this recently on, I think it might have been Twitter, where they did an experiment where everybody walked into a lift and they were all part of the setup except for one person. And they all walked into the lift and faced the wrong way. So you know how we all walk into a lift and we all turn and face the door as it's sort of the exit out. And so they all were facing the wrong way. And the one person who was not part of the setup was sort of facing the right way, which is the right thing to do. And then a few sort of floors, some of the people left and new people came in, but again, they were all part of the setup. And as they came in, they also faced the wrong way or faced the back of the wall, back of the lift. And gradually you see the person who is facing forward slowly, very, very slowly, very subtly, very unconsciously begin to turn in order to fit in to the group. And by the end of it, they literally are facing the other way. And when asked about it, they weren't really cognizant that that's what they were doing. And that's what's so interesting. And that's where I think we really need to understand what it means to really, really show up as being authentic. And it is about being aware, being conscious, being present, and recognizing that there's something interesting going on. And it would have been so much better if they'd had the courage to say, hey, this is really interesting, what's going on here? That curiosity that we started off with. If they were curious, why are people facing the other way? Maybe, they might have come to some conclusions, maybe not. But that is what authenticity is really about for me. It's about not being impacted by those subtle things that we're all impacted by, not being led by group conformity, because just because the group conforms doesn't mean that it's right. And I think when we're really, really authentically showing up as ourselves, then we have that courage. And that courage, I believe, comes from a very clear, very knowing heart that knows that this is who I am, this is what's right for me, and this is what's right for, for those around me. So it's not about being selfish. It's not about saying, well, this is me and I don't care. It's about saying, well, this is me and I know that this is what's right on a deeper level. And so to really be authentic with that and to question those things that show up that might compel us to go against ourselves, but to question it and then maybe turn those people around and get them to go, no, actually, maybe you should be facing this way.
And it's such an interesting discernment to make there, Hema, because I think often we confuse our conditioned self with our authentic self. And I heard you make the comment that, this is who I am and this is how I show up. And people can get confused with being outspoken or being sort of aggressively who they think they are with authenticity. And this idea that we're tribal creatures inherently, and so we will eventually conform to what we're seeing around us. And we know through psychology, as children, we onboard so many narratives about ourselves from such a young age. And I just love this discernment between authenticity and what I'm really hearing as being the conditioned self, which is what we take through the world in our everyday lives and in our leadership.
So absolutely, that's beautifully put. That's exactly it. It's the conditioned self, and moving away from the sort of need to be selfishly authentic and to be genuinely authentic.
And I think what I'm also hearing as well, Hema, in how you're speaking about omnipreneurship, as well as this sense of deep authenticity. And I love that you mentioned the word courage, because that certainly resonated for me as being a component, curiosity as well as courage. And also a little bit of almost radical responsibility for, in that moment, feeling that overwhelm and those natural sort of psychological tugs on us of groupthink, of what everyone else is doing, and having a little bit of sort of, maybe fierceness even about saying, no, this doesn't align. I'm tuning in deeply to who I truly am, and sensing that this just doesn't align. And on almost a practical level, that just reminds me also that this is where self-care actually really matters, because when we can only, I think, really find that attunement and really tune into that when we're really looking after ourselves, when we're making sure that we're feeling nourished, we're taking really good care of our bodies, minds and souls, so that we have that attunement and awareness that you spoke to earlier, to be able to make that discernment.
Absolutely. And self-care is as much about discipline, that we prioritize ourselves, we prioritize those things that set us up to be well, to be healthy, to be, really centered in ourselves, so that we can show up for other people in the way that we really need to. And that's an important aspect of work, because, for decades that was taken away. The idea that you should take care of yourself. It's like, no, you have to be at work and you have to fulfill these, these kind of responsibilities and get this project done at any cost. It doesn't matter that you're up half the night or whatever. And it's just not healthy. It's not a healthy way for us to be living.
Yeah, and you've spoken to some of, I think, the internal barriers that we can encounter as leaders when we're wanting to, really lead from the wisdom of the heart, some of these biases and these tendencies that we have on quite a subconscious level often. What are the sort of external factors that you see as really inhibiting a leader's ability to act and lead from their heart wisdom?
Well, first and foremost, I would say in businesses, definitely bureaucracy. Because it's not just about, your call, there's lots of other people involved. And so really, really being able to lead from the heart, I think, is having that ability to positively impact and influence others, to be able to see the world through your perspective, when you have a clear perspective of what's really, really needed, even though logically it may not make sense. And so, it's really being able to stand your own, hold your own space, and, stand your ground when you really, really believe something. And that comes from, the confidence. And a lot of people talk about confidence and, what is that confidence? I think the confidence is to be able to speak out, to speak up, even if it doesn't make sense. Because especially when it's an intuition, there's one thing when you've made sense of something and you can talk it through as a presentation and you can go through all the logical steps to convince a board, for example, that this is, what we should be doing. But there are times when we're heart-centered and actually there isn't the logic, and sometimes there aren't the steps. And how do you get people to sort of understand, believe in what you're saying? And I think it's a lot to do with heart resonance. It's really those external barriers that you're going to meet. I think you're going to be much better at dealing with those barriers when you really have a deep knowingness, because the strongest heart is what it gets entrained to. And the strongest heart, I think, is the one that has the most confidence, not confidence superficially, but confidence in trusting that intuition, that it comes from that deeper place. And to so then be able to say, right, this is how I'm going to communicate to these people. And they may not get it at first, and I may not have all the words, I may not have all the presentation diagrams and facts and figures, but if I can just, really, really express what I'm really feeling, to find the words for it, and to be able to positively impact. But I think it's, when you believe in something so strongly, I do think that you have that courage, even if you're not necessarily courageous in that moment, you have the courage to see it through. So there are lots of barriers that we're met with in the world because, you're going to get the negative kind of, critics, people who are sort of naysayers, and that's where I think, really, really being centered in your heart is so important, because you don't get swayed by it.
Yeah, I'd love to test a theory with you if I can, Hema. And I just want to also point to the fact that the word courage, of course, comes from the French word for heart, coeur. But also, I feel like in those moments where we perhaps don't have all the PowerPoint presentations ready, and we don't have all of that data necessarily to back what we're saying, but when we're able to be very present in our communication, and for me it almost feels like a sort of a connection almost physically with my heart in what I'm saying, that communication has a much more impactful resonance, I feel. And so it might be that I feel like I'm speaking from my heart, almost literally. That is when sometimes we can almost don't need perhaps all of that data or all of this evidence to show that this is the way. We get that sort of sense of connectivity because we're speaking from such a heart-centered place. Does that make sense? And does that resonate with your work?
Oh, absolutely, completely. You said it so beautifully, Sally, because that's exactly what I would say. In my years of speaking, I haven't always had the data sort of to back it up because, when I started speaking about it years and years ago, now we have people like HeartMath who are, and again, I don't think it quite sort of touches the depths of what is possible in terms of, science is limiting because it can only measure what technology can create. And so therefore, there's an infiniteness to the heart, and that's what I really feel. But exactly as you said, Sally, I feel that when I spoke, that's why people just really got it. Sometimes they'd be like, I don't know what you said, but it resonates so deeply as a truth. So they can't put it into words, and they don't quite get it, and they don't quite get why it makes them feel at peace, why it feels right, but somehow it does. And that's what I say, that we all know on a feeling level what feels right, and we all know when something is not right. The thing is, how do we become more aware of it, and how do we tune into it, and how do we shift our thinking so that we are able to really feel that sense of resonance and to really speak from our heart and let go of the monkey mind that says, but you have to have X, Y, and Z, and if you don't have X, Y, and Z, then it's not going to work. Whereas we know on a deeper level that when there's something that comes deep from our heart, whether it's what we say, what we believe, what we feel, when it comes from deep within the heart, there's a truth to it. And it might be a truth in that moment because, of course, the world is evolving and changing, and so it's not absolute, but it's a contextual truth.
Wow, that is so powerful, Hema. And I want to sort of shift towards something that I think is really important for leaders to understand as well. And you've spoken a lot around this concept of tuning into our own heart intelligence and allowing that to be sort of our guiding light, even if we struggle to explain sometimes why we're doing it or why we're feeling the way we're feeling. And something that is really important for leaders and is a key piece of their job is also the care of their employees and the care of others. And we know that by taking care of people in business, the bottom line will take care of itself. And that's a conviction that we very much have at Human Leaders. And I'd love to hear from you sort of shifting that focus a little bit now. And what are some of the key steps that leaders can take to start taking better care of their people and their employees in this heart-centered way?
Oh, that's such a great question, and really, that's why I do the work that I do, because it's less about the leaders. Of course, it's about them because they impact and influence so much, but it's really about the people. In my years of work, I've seen so many people struggle, and I just see it's unnecessary. Sometimes it's because the leaders that they're surrounded by just aren't present, just don't care about them in the way that they should, probably because they've got their own stuff going on. So it's not that they're uncaring, so that's not what this is about. I think the way that leaders need to take care of people is absolutely first and foremost taking care of themselves. And the sort of oxygen analogy, you've got to make sure you've got your oxygen before you try and give it to someone else. They need to step up and to really be willing to take this sort of training and to not think that it's not important, it's not necessary. It is. If the only thing you learn from the training about how to be a more heart-centered leader is that I already know all of this, then that's great, because if you already know it, you're suddenly conscious of it and you're proactively applying it. So that's fantastic. But number two, I would say if they really want to take care of other people, then it's, not putting them into a box, to see their individuality. Because each person is going through something, and good and bad. And if you can really, really see the person, you'll see their strengths, you'll see their weaknesses, and you'll see what can be built on, what can be cultivated, the qualities that will make them better, stronger as people, first and foremost, and then as employees. Whereas if the attention and intention is on how can we get them to work better, work more, more productive, you're asking the wrong question as far as I'm concerned. Because the minute you ask that question, you're going to get the wrong answer. The minute you ask yourself, what is it this person needs? What do they bring to the table? And what do they need? So it might be a false economy for them to think, well, I don't have time for that. And again, I've worked with lots of people where that's been the case. And it's like, well, actually, the truth is you don't not have time for it, because if you don't make time, these people will leave, or they will become gradually unproductive. And you might think they're being productive because they're now working 12 hours a day, but actually how many of those hours have been productive? How many of those hours have they been really present? Could they have spent literally 2 hours doing what they took 12 hours to do? And the answer for me has pretty much always been yes. When we're in flow, when we're in our heart space, when we feel seen, when we feel heard, when we feel really, really kind of validated for who we are, our strengths and our weaknesses, we are able to get so much more done in such little time. And that's what leaders need to recognize, that taking care of others and really seeing them and making time for that is absolutely essential. And if you want a more productive, more creative, workforce, then I would say, allow them to show up the best possible version of themselves.
I think that's such an important message, especially at the moment, Hema. We're seeing, I think, so many people who are so bright, so talented, have so much to give, who find themselves in organizations often in a situation where that's thwarted, and that gradual drift then can be it can really decimate your sense of self. And I think a lot of people are then saying, well, I'm going to work for myself, I'm going to leave. And that was a step I actually made, shifting out of law to work for myself for that exact reason, to take ownership back of that time in a way that felt healthy and energizing and authentic to me. So I think that's such an important message for leaders to have, that question needs to be drop the productivity and all those kind of questions, and really focus on the individual, their needs, and holding space for that with that beautiful heart intelligence which you've described so wonderfully for us through this conversation. I have many more questions. I'll hold it to one if I may. And I'm just curious if someone's listening and they feel like, well, I'd love to take a step towards leading more from my heart intelligence, what would be that first step that you would suggest a person might take?
So I would really say that it's important to get support. Like I say, if the only thing you learn from doing some sort of training or having a mentor is that you know certain things, it solidifies it. I think sometimes when we know, but we don't know that we know, and someone just, holds a mirror up to us and says, you know this, it really, really helps that confidence and, the courage to then go forward with it. But I would say getting the support, finding the right mentor, finding the right teacher, the right training. And I know you provide quite a lot, and we do too. So take that step, because I don't think that it's ever a waste of time or waste of energy or waste of money. We always learn something new. Every podcast you listen to, I listen to them, all the time. Like, that's my morning thing. There's always something to learn from somebody, even if it's just a phraseology or I spoke to a lovely man yesterday. We were on a call, and he said, the aha moment. And I've heard that concept before, and I've worked with somebody else who's sort of talked about it. But I think we need more of those, because those moments when we hear something, when we learn something, when we understand something about ourselves and the world we're living in, that allows our heart energy to expand rather than contract, where there is more love, more light let in. I really think that that's what helps us evolve. And ultimately, I think we're not here to learn. I think we are absolutely here to evolve. And that's why I say, I'm here about evolutionary leadership. And so I think we have to be willing to take those steps to evolve our own consciousness and our own connection to our hearts.
Hema, thank you so much. Such potent and powerful words that we can all take on board. And as I just heard you say, taking the first step is to just look for support and know that connecting to others is the first step in this journey of evolving yourself. Thank you so much of being part of We Are Human Leaders. We've been so grateful to share this conversation with you today.
Thank you for joining us for this powerful conversation with Hema Vyas on heart intelligence in leadership. As Hema mentioned, there have always been leaders who've led from the heart, they just haven't known it. We need leaders to become aware of it, and we couldn't agree more. You can find and follow Hema's work at hemavyas.com, HEMAVYAS.com. Thank you for being with us on this journey of human leadership. See you again soon.
Thank you so much for sharing this space with us. If you're ready to join us and be part of the Human Leaders community, find us at www.wearehumanleaders.com. Thanks for being on the journey with us, and we'll see you next time.